another epoxy project, this time in Queens, to do the basement of a church. They've chosen a flat white color, and here's what you have to do before laying the epoxy on. The first step is always gonna be patching any seams, joints, cracks, or anything that's not gonna make the epoxy as seamless as possible. If you have any dips or low points, you wanna fill them in with self-leveling concrete, and if you have any high points, you wanna grind them down, because if the floor isn't completely flat, it's gonna be noticeable in the finished product. And the next stop is putting blue painter's tape over anything you don't want getting epoxied. You would do this with the walls, but they're gonna repaint them anyways, and so it's extra work for no reason. Once all that is finished, now we're ready for a primer coat. We're using water-based epoxy as the primer coat, and the color is white. It's important to choose the right color for the right color of epoxy you'll be using, because if you use a black primer underneath a white epoxy, you're gonna end up having something looking more gray than white. It's 4 parts A to 1 part B, and the coverage for the 5-gallon kit is gonna be on your screen right now. You always gotta remember to pre-mix the part A because the pigment settles down all the way to the bottom, and you need it all to rise up and spread evenly. So we set up our mixing station right by the exit. We're gonna start working all the way down to the back and then make our way forward so that we can leave the building without having to walk all over the epoxy we just stepped on. So the best way to do it is to use a 6-inch nap roller on the corners and the hard to reach areas, and then hit everything else and do most of the work with a 18-inch. So we came back the next day, and the amount of patchwork that we had to do yesterday, we inevitably missed a lot of them, but that's okay because we're gonna be adding 2 layers of GE100, which is the top coat. It's not gonna be shown through. So now we're gonna be mixing up our GE100, which is our 100% solids epoxy, and it's the same method. You gotta pre-mix the part A because the pigment has settled down onto the bottom, and then you mix 2 parts A with 1 part B. And you always gotta remember to wear spike shoes while you're rolling on epoxy because the spikes prevent you from leaving footsteps in the epoxy, and it also helps with not slipping on the epoxy floor like you would if you're wearing soccer shoes. So it's 2 days from the time we poured it, and the reason why we haven't done it the next day is because epoxy reacts negatively with cold. It takes a lot longer for it to cure. Same thing vice versa with heat. If it's really hot, it's gonna set up a lot quicker. The patchwork that we did got completely covered, so there's no point in doing a second layer. We're just gonna go sand everything down and then put a sealer on top of it. We're gonna be using GU30, which has a grip additive on it, so that it's not gonna be as shiny as it is right now. It's gonna be more matte, but it's gonna have grip so that nobody's gonna slip once the epoxy gets wet. The epoxy has to get sanded so that the epoxy and the top coat can actually grip onto each other and it won't chip off with time. Also, right now is the ideal time to remove that painter's tape. And then of course you gotta vacuum all that dust up before we start putting our sealer on. GU30 doesn't come with 2 parts, it comes with 3. Part A, Part B. Part C, which is the additive for the non-slip agent. And on top of that, we're adding our GU30 white pigment, which is gonna make sure that no matter what happens, if the floor gets scratched, anything gets digged up, you have 3 layers of white underneath. It's gonna look really nice. Okay, we're gonna pre-mix the pigment, put it into the Part B. We're gonna put the powder into the Part B, and the last step is gonna be putting the Part A into the Part B. When you're pouring the GU30, you don't need a lot. A little bit goes a long way. With this amount of white on white on white, you can barely even see the GU30. So you have to get it everywhere, but if you do manage to miss a spot, it's not the end of the world. So you've made it to the end of my video, but now I want to ask you for a quick favor. See, the YouTube algorithm gets tricked into showing my video to a lot more people if a lot of people comment on it. So criticize me, praise me, or just ask a question. As long as you leave a comment, I'm gonna appreciate it a lot. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for the next video.